Good morning. These slides here focus on some policy developments that are relevant in the broader sustainability context, particularly issues surrounding environmental sustainability. As we know, the Common Agricultural Policy is under considerable pressure to become more sustainable. The CAP has been traditionally about the support of farm incomes and ensuring adequate food supplies, but we have seen in recent years a rise in prominence of environmental concerns around such issues as emissions to the air, biodiversity, animal welfare, and issues associated with human health and food production. So all of these pressures suggest that we need to revisit the current food production system and deliver a system that's more sustainable in a broader context. So that implies ultimately that food production needs to deliver on economic and social goals, but also it needs to deliver on environmental goals. And when we think about these economic and social and environmental considerations together, we can think of those under the umbrella of sustainability. And sustainability, therefore, is a multidimensional concept. We can't focus overly on any one of these three factors at the expense of the other two. So some people, when they talk about sustainability, they are, by implication, just talking about this middle one here, the environmental sustainability. But I think what we would say is that all three strands of sustainability need to be taken into consideration. Now, the way we're doing this is by collecting data through the Teagasc National Farm Survey, which has been in existence since 1972, at the point when Ireland joined the European Union. And the Teagasc National Farm Survey forms part of a broader pan-European network, which is known as the EU Farm Accountancy Data Network, which aims to collect data on farms in the member states and report that data back to the European Commission in Brussels. And the recent EU Farm to Fork strategy, which has been published, has as one of its objectives to convert the Farm Accountancy Data Network, or FADN, into a farm sustainability data network. So the traditional focus of the FADN, our FADN, was on economic type variables, but this has been broadened out over time, and the objective for the future is that it would broaden further to include a broader range of sustainability metrics around the environment and also around social issues. In Ireland, we're already ahead of the curve to some extent because we're already collecting a lot of that additional data. So we go above and beyond what's required by FADN in the Teagasc National Farm Survey, and we've done that for several years. And in Cathal's presentation, you will see that we have quite an extensive time series, particularly now of environmental variables that didn't exist in the past. We would argue that the best approach ultimately here is to integrate all this data so that we have economic, social, and environmental data representative of farms, because that provides a better resource for research purposes, and in turn that can help us to unlock the answers to more complex policy questions. If we think about the 2020 Teagasc Sustainability Report, which Cathal will delve into in more detail, it has a comprehensive range of results for 4 farm systems, the 4 principal farm systems in Irish agriculture: dairy, cattle production, sheep production, and tillage. And it covers 4 sustainability dimensions. I talked specifically about economic, environmental, and social metrics earlier, but we also covered the innovation metric, which is a metric that's more focused on the abilities of farmers to adopt and to change what it is that they're doing. So we have 129 indicators for 2020, and we also have a time dimension to the data. So the data now runs from 2012 through to 2020. And that detailed data is reported in the appendix to the sustainability report. So we have the capacity to look at a 3-year rolling average from 2012 to 2020 also. And the reason we might do a rolling average is because we will see some variability from one year to the next, which is down to factors such as weather conditions, which might affect the usage of inputs or the level of output that gets produced. And particularly for some of these variables, that interannual variability can not be particularly useful, I guess, because it relates to factors that are outside of the farmer's control. So by using a 3-year rolling average, we try to smooth out what's happening over time. If we think about the policy rationale for why this work is necessary, governments and researchers need to monitor agriculture. Agriculture's interaction with the environment has become particularly important. And I've already mentioned that policy is in creating environmental targets, both at a national level in Ireland and also at an overall EU level. So those targets are focused around issues like climate change, air quality, water quality, biodiversity, the protection of wildlife, and food quality. And if we think about the CAP reforms ambitions, the reform that's currently being finalised, it has a more targeted environmental focus in terms of the CAP spending. And there's a requirement for individual member states to better align their CAP spending with environmental goals for each country. It's also a results-based approach. We're moving to a results-based approach in the CAP. So that's a shift away from the old system of where farmers were paid for compliance with rules to a new model where farmers will be paid for the delivery of desirable outcomes. So if we're going to be able to measure those desirable outcomes, we need better indicators for the agriculture sector in order to measure the progress that is being achieved across a wide range of areas and to be able to ultimately measure the effectiveness of policy. So if we just think also for a moment about the farm to fork strategy, which is a subcomponent, I guess, of the overall European Green Deal, which sets a course for European policy, European Union policy in a wider sense, I guess, over the coming decade. It has a number of quite specific environmental targets that it's seeking to be achieved with respect to agriculture, and they include reductions in the usage of pesticides, the reductions in nutrient losses associated with fertilizer use, and indeed they want to see a reduction in synthetic fertilizer use of around 20% taking place. Antimicrobials as well. We need to reduce the sale of antimicrobials in farming. The farm to fork strategy sets a target for doing that of 50%. And then finally, there's an objective around increasing the amount of organic farming. And the specific objective the EU has in that context is to increase to about 25% the agricultural land area in the European Union that is in organic farming. Here back in Ireland, we have also an evolving national policy for the environment, specifically around greenhouse gas emissions. In 2019, we had a climate action plan which set a national target to reduce Ireland's greenhouse gas emissions by about 30% by 2030. And within that, agriculture had a target to reduce its emissions by 10 to 15%. However, under the new climate action plan, which has been set out in 2021, and also following the new Climate Action and Low Carbon Development Act, which was passed in 2021, we have more substantial objectives for reductions in Ireland's greenhouse gas emissions. So the target is now to reduce Ireland's greenhouse gas emissions nationally by 51% by 2030 compared to 2018. And specifically in respect of each sector, ranges have been set in terms of the level of reduction to be achieved by each part of the economy. And we can see those listed here. And you can see particularly important or of interest for this presentation is the 22 to 30% reduction range targeted for agriculture to be achieved by 2030 and compared to the level of emissions in 2018. And you can see here set out as well the reduction targets for other parts of the economy. Also in the Low Carbon Climate Act, we see a plan with respect to biodiversity. So biodiversity is mentioned very often in that act. The need to preserve and enhance biodiversity. We need to be able to do that. And in order to be able to do that, we need to be able to measure what's happening on farms with respect to biodiversity in a meaningful way. And John Finn's presentation later in this session goes into some detail about how that might be possible. So there'll be more on that later in John's presentation. So that takes me to the end, and thank you for your interest in this presentation. And I will now pass you over to my colleague, Cathal Buckley, who's going to take you through the detail of his presentation.